Hey folks, Dave here, and I like versus episodes. Here to talk to you today about the Spyderco Shaman and the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. These are two very similar knives that exist with each other in a very interesting kind of concert. The fact that this exists raises interesting questions for me, and I would like today to just go over some of the basic differences. Starting with the handle. You can't see probably, but right there you can actually see the texture of the PM2, whereas you cannot on the Shaman. I do not know if this is true for all Shamans across the board, but at least for the Blade HQ M4 version, it is a smooth scale. I believe that is the case for the base as well. Whereas the Paramilitary 2 is kind of famous for having a fairly just held both up to the mic, scratched it with my finger. The Paramilitary 2 is kind of famous for having a fairly rough textured G10, whereas the Shaman is a little bit more smooth. I genuinely am confused by that, the Shaman being kind of the specifically built for this is the hard use one. You would think that this would be the handle that is more heavily textured, but what do I know about knife design? The scale ergonomics as well are very, very different. In that, well, the handle shape, I should say, I apologize. Once again, something that the PM2 is famous for is the canoe handle shape. And what that's referring to is this flare out right here. So if you were to just look at that, you would probably want to row it down a river. And that's the hook back there to keep your pinky on board. So here versus here is meant to be a fairly similar resting place for your fingers. Whereas on the Shaman, it doesn't hook out, it flattens. It continues extending. I believe that that was probably a conscious decision made for a gloved hand. You know, a glove makes your fingers a little bit fatter, you're going to need a little bit more room. And since these handles are almost exactly the exact same length, it's the lack of the hump coming back that gives this just a little bit more room for your fingers. You can still choke up, obviously, and have all of this bit extended, but if you need to, I don't know, whack at something, you can come back and move back even further on the handle than is possible than is comfortable with the PM2. Flipping over to talk about the pocket clip, and this is a huge difference in that the PM2 is using a much more standard pocket clip design than the Shaman. It's also a little bit more deep carry, not as deep as I would like to see, obviously, on the PM2, but it does serve its purpose. On the Shaman, to my knowledge, this is the only pocket clip of this style that Spyderco produces. I don't have every Spyderco. So I should say that of the Spydercos that I have, this is the only one. It looks similar to the Enduro one, but it is not. It is very different. And it's a little bit lower rider. I believe, as I spoke about with in the review, that to give you a little bit more of a grip as you pull out. Since this is more of a hard use knife, that makes sense to me, but it is still an interesting design choice. I don't understand why they didn't just use the regular pocket clip. You know, is the lanyard hole, are you lacking that much room to just drill a different hole in another place? Which are different sizes, by the way. The PM2 lanyard hole is much larger and has a metal sheath inside of it to guide your lanyard through and make sure that it doesn't interfere with the blade at all. Side note, that is part of what makes taking this knife down so very, very frustrating, because you have to deal with that. And when you put it back, sometimes the G10 breaks. You know, just word to the wise. Next, a infinitesimally small little factoid here, but the stop pins are different. So here on the Shaman, you might not be able to see because it is black, which is good, because on a black knife you want blacked out hardware. But you can see right there, you can see more intently, what? But you can see the stop pin right there. It is pinned in either side, whereas with the PM2, it is a screw-in and it is silver. PM2 stop pin also is bigger. I don't think that matters, just a fun fact. Again, this is the only Spyderco that I'm familiar with that has the stop pin inset in the liners and still coming through the G10. The jimping is also different. So on the blades themselves, you will see very similar jimping. They appear to be of similar aggressiveness and sharpness and spacing. I wish they were less sharp, but I have little wuss hands. The difference is in the handles themselves. On the PM2, right back there, right where the stop pin is, you can see a little bit of jimping there. It is not here on the Shaman, and let me find it. And on the lock bar access, you can see that on the compression lock right there, there are little ridges to help you index the lock bar. They are not on the PM2. That's an interesting decision. I believe that both should have both. Having one on one and not the other, that's weird. I really do like having just a little bit of very soft, I don't even know if this is rough enough to be called jimping, just a little bit of knurling. I don't know. Just the texture there on the lock bar just helps you grab it a little bit better, I guess. I just like that a little bit better. The finger choil is also just of a slightly different dimension. You can see here on the PM2 that the heel of the blade comes into a bit of a triangle, whereas here on the Shaman, it's much more round, a bit of a circle. In my review, that is what I refer to as the weird bit, and the very worst thing about this knife, the absolute trash monkeyest worst thing about this, is that on the PM2 and the Yojimbo and any well-made, correctly produced Spyderco, you can close the knife and it doesn't interfere with your finger. Whereas on the Shaman, absolute garbage train that this particular feature is, not a feature, it's a bug. That bit hits your finger and interacts with it. And that's not okay. That's very stupid. I want somebody to explain that to me, why that had to be that way. The PM2 is correct. That is dumb. The weird bit is dumb. Going back to the jimping a little bit though, it adds, on the Shaman, it adds an additional element because the tang of the blade sits just a little bit proud of the handles. We'll see if I can do this. Haha, first try. And the combination of the position of the tang as well as the super aggressive jimping allows you to front flip it. I wouldn't suggest it a lot. It tears up your thumb, but technically speaking, you can do it. Backspacer, also another thing. I personally like backspacers, which is why on my PM2, I have added one. However, stock, they do not come. On the Shaman, it does have, I believe that is a G10 backspacer back in there. It's not very long, it's just enough to cover up the tip of the blade, which is what I want. I do also wish that this were flush fit with the liners, which is probably why they just didn't even try to do it on the PM2. Here is another interesting one for me, just in that how big the Shaman actually is, it means that there's a huge difference in weight. So Shaman, you can see, is 5.2 ounces, 5.26, whereas the PM2, the Paramilitary 2, is going to weigh in at about 4 ounces. So it's just a whole lot, it's an ounce and a half lighter. Is that something that you are going to feel in your pocket? Not necessarily. But in your hand, you definitely can. And the interesting thing, that's interesting to me because they are the exact same size. They have the exact same blade length at about 3¼ inches. They have the exact same handle length at, I believe, like 4½, 4¼ I don't remember. But they're the exact same, but the Shaman is just a little bit thicker. And it really is, you can see, really, you probably can't because both are black blades, but it's really all up in that blade. It's just a little bit wider, whereas the PM2 goes narrow, the Shaman stays wide. And that's partially because the Shaman is based on the native 5. So you can see, it's just a native big brother. Whereas the PM2 is, I believe that Spyderco refers to it as their leaf shape, and it much more closely resembles a Delica in the coming to the tip with a full flat grind. One of the big differences that I'm expecting to continue to be true over the next 20 years, however long before the heat death of the universe, is the variants that are released. So far, the PM2 is a 10, 20-year-old knife? I don't know. It's very old. It's been around for a while, and thus has been used by Spyderco as kind of their introductory, not quite their to Mule Team level, but there's a PM2 in almost every steel that Spyderco has ever used. You want K390, you want M390, you want, I don't know if N690 exists, but S30, S35, this is 10V, there's a 4V1, the Spy 35, all of them. The PM2 has been done in almost every single steel that Spyderco uses. Hasn't been done in VG10 because the Delica exists, has not been done in 8CR13 MOV because the Tenacious exist. Everything else the PM2 has been done in. It's been done in Maximet. It's been done in, I don't know if it's been done in ZDP. That would actually be interesting to see. But it's been done in the very hard stuff and the more soft stuff. Not 1095, but a 1095 equivalent the PM2 has been done in. Actually, it may have been done in actual 1095. PM2's crazy, man, is what I'm saying. The Shaman seems to have a much more specific focus in that, other than this one being an M4 version. But the Shaman, so far in the releases that it has been, it's steel-wise, in the steel releases, so far have been Rex 45, have been 4V, have been etc. The base is also S30, which are much more Crewwear, Z-Wear, which are much more soft steels versus, you know, a Maximet. I'm not expecting a Shaman to be released in a ZDP and a Maximet in a Rex 121, whereas a PM2, absolutely I expect that. I believe that part of the reason for that is being a little bit more hard use, and this is one of the reasons why I'm using that term for the Shaman being more hard use than the PM2. Part of it is the delicacy of the tip, and part of it is the steels that it's being released in. They are steels that are less likely to chip, that are easier to sharpen, that kind of thing. And even with the physical differences between the two, there are changes in the variants that have been and will be released. I do not know of a Paramilitary 2 that has been a PM2 variant that has been released stock with micarta. Shaman, there's at least the Crewwear version. I'd love it if all of them did, but that's a different conversation. This one will shortly. And even physical variants going into blade shape. This is an Emerson PM2. By the time this airs, hopefully I will have ordered my other one. Mr. Spyderco Sauglasser, Eric Lesser, Mr. Spyderco has been teasing for the last 2 or 3 years the PM2 Tonto. It'd be super weird if that ever happened to the Shaman. It kind of makes sense that it's happening to the PM2. And finally, the difference, a big difference between, you know, which one that you want is probably going to end up being price. The Shaman is more expensive. Baseline, the PM2 cost about $160. used to be not so long ago. It used to be 120, but now it's 160. So most of the variants will be about 170, 180. The Shaman baseline is about 200. That $30 difference it's not insignificant for a lot of people, and most of the variants will end up being about 220 like this one was. That difference is not, it's unfortunate because it's not insignificant. Those have been some of the differences between the Spyderco Paramilitary 2 and the Spyderco Shaman. I tried to make the list as exhaustive as I could. I am absolutely convinced that I missed some important stuff. If you caught any of them, let me know down below. If you have any questions, comments, or stories, let me know down below. As far as which one I prefer, I don't know that that's a real question. I love them both absolutely for different reasons. And after I put some micarta scales on this thing, whenever they come in, I will love this thing even more than I do right now. But I love these things for the different reasons that I've mentioned. They, in my life at least, serve different purposes. Whereas a more EDC friendly and a more work friendly, if that makes sense. In a past occupation, I sometimes had to do things with my knife that were not exactly exactly tip safe, if that makes sense, especially for how delicate the PM2 tip makes me feel that it is. I'm sure that it's fine. It's just the way that I feel. That's just how I feel. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or stories, let me know down below. Other than that, y'all have a great day.